I was given a second chance, and the worst part is that I didn't recognize it when it arrived. People like to imagine second chances as something dramatic. A near-death moment. A sudden miracle. A clear sign from the universe. Mine came quietly, disguised as relief. I survived something that should have ended me not physically, but in every other way that matters. And when it was over, everyone said the same thing: "You're lucky, now you can start over." What no one tells you is that starting over doesn't erase who you were when you failed the first time. I woke up one morning with my life technically intact and my insides completely hollow. The crisis had passed. The damage was done. And yet I was still here. Breathing. Functioning. Expected to be grateful. At first, I was. I promised myself I would do everything differently. I would be better. More present. More honest. I would never waste time again. I would never ignore the quiet warnings inside me. I said all the right things mostly to myself and believed them just enough to keep going. But old habits don't disappear just because you survive their consequences. The truth is, I didn't lose my life when everything collapsed. I lost my clarity. Fear moved in where certainty used to live. Every decision became heavy. Every choice felt loaded with the possibility of repeating the same mistakes. And slowly, without realizing it, I began to freeze. People thought I was healing. From the outside, it looked convincing. I went back to routines. I smiled at the right moments. I said I was fine often enough that others stopped asking. But inside, I was constantly monitoring myself, terrified of choosing wrong again. Second chances come with an unspoken pressure: don't mess this up. That pressure was suffocating. I became cautious in ways that looked responsible but felt paralyzing. I avoided risk. I avoided conflict. I avoided wanting things too strongly. Desire had betrayed me once before, or so I told myself. I confused caution with wisdom and fear with maturity. There were nights when I lay awake replaying my past, examining every moment that led me there. If I had said no. If I had left earlier. If I had listened to myself instead of everyone else. The past became a courtroom, and I was both the accused and the judge. There was no verdict, only exhaustion. What scared me most was the realization that my second chance was slowly turning into a second version of the same mistake, quieter, slower, but just as empty. I wasn't ruining my life dramatically this time. I was wasting it carefully. I started to notice how disconnected I felt from my own days. Hours passed without memory. Conversations felt distant, like I was listening from another room. I was present, but not engaged. Alive, but not invested. One afternoon, I caught myself thinking, at least nothing bad is happening. And that thought terrified me. Nothing bad was happening and nothing meaningful either. I remembered who I used to be before everything went wrong. Not happier. Just more alive. More willing to feel things fully, even when it hurt. Now, I was protecting myself from pain by also blocking out joy. I called it balance. It was numbness. The second chance didn't ask me to be perfect. It asked me to be honest. And that was the part I kept avoiding. There was a moment, small, almost invisible, when I realized I was lying again. Not in words, but in posture. In silence. In the way I agreed to things I didn't want because disagreeing felt dangerous. I told myself I was being flexible. Understanding. But really, I was disappearing to avoid risk. I had survived losing everything once. And instead of learning that I could rebuild, I learned that I should never let myself fall again. That belief shaped everything I did afterward. I began living defensively. Carefully. Halfway. The second chance wasn't failing me. I was failing it quietly, politely, without anyone noticing. And the worst part was this: I knew it. Every morning, that knowledge sat in my chest like a weight I couldn't explain. I wasn't unhappy enough to escape. I wasn't fulfilled enough to stay. I existed in the most dangerous place of all, the space between regret and fear. I told myself I still had time. That healing was slow. That clarity would come later. But deep down, I recognized the pattern. This was how the first life slipped away too, not with disaster, but with delay. The second chance was still open. But it wouldn't wait forever. And I was running out of excuses to ignore that. I began to understand that fear doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers reasonable things. Be careful. Take your time. Don't rush. You've already made mistakes, don't make more. Those words sounded wise. Protective. And that's how fear survives. It dresses itself up as responsibility. After everything that had happened, people treated me differently. Softer. More cautious. As if I were fragile glass that had already cracked once. I let them. It gave me permission to stay small. To avoid making decisions that could disappoint anyone again, including myself. But the body remembers what the mind tries to manage. There were moments when my chest tightened for no clear reason. When my hands shook while doing nothing important. When my thoughts looped endlessly around hypothetical futures that never arrived. I wasn't living, I was rehearsing survival. I tried to convince myself this was healing. That numbness was just a phase. That eventually I would feel safe enough to want things again. But safety without direction becomes a cage you lock from the inside. The second chance didn't feel like freedom anymore. It felt like probation. Every choice carried an invisible warning label: choose wrong, and you'll deserve what happens next. I became obsessed with avoiding regret, not realizing that avoidance itself was quietly becoming my biggest regret. There was a particular evening I remember clearly. I was invited somewhere, nothing dramatic, just a small opportunity that would have required me to say yes without knowing the outcome. In the past, I would have gone without thinking. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, weighing consequences like a judge who had forgotten what joy felt like. I didn't go. And the relief was immediate. Warm. Seductive. That scared me. Relief should not feel like giving up. But that's exactly what it was. I had chosen comfort over possibility. Again. The pattern was returning, dressed as caution. I started noticing how often I said maybe later. Later became my favorite word. It sounded hopeful without requiring commitment. Later never arrived. The moral dilemma wasn't about right versus wrong. It was about risk versus stagnation. About whether protecting myself from pain was worth sacrificing the chance to feel alive. I understood, intellectually, that no life is guaranteed. But emotionally, I was still negotiating with fear, hoping it would eventually let me go. It didn't. Fear doesn't release you. It replaces you. I thought about the person I used to be, not idealized, not innocent, just engaged. Someone who could want things without immediately calculating the cost. I missed that version of myself more than I missed the life I had lost. The realization that broke me was simple and brutal: my second chance was becoming a slower version of my first failure. Same avoidance. Same silence. Same internal bargaining. Different circumstances, same outcome. I wasn't collapsing this time. I was fading. And fading is harder to notice. Harder to explain. Harder to justify leaving for. People understand breakdowns. They respect dramatic exits. But how do you explain walking away from a life that isn't terrible, just empty? How do you justify choosing uncertainty when nothing is technically wrong? I couldn't. Not to others. Not even to myself. So I stayed. Longer than I should have. Long enough to feel that familiar heaviness settle in again. Long enough to recognize the early signs of disappearance. That's when the thought came, uninvited, unwelcome, undeniable. Maybe the second chance wasn't about fixing the past. Maybe it was about refusing to repeat it even if that meant risking everything again. The question wasn't whether I would fail. The question was whether I was willing to live at all, knowing failure was possible. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark, listening to my own breathing, realizing how much effort it took just to exist this way. How much energy went into staying neutral, contained, unexposed. I understood then that neutrality is not safety. It's surrender. I didn't know what I would choose yet. I only knew that doing nothing was already a choice and it was slowly killing something essential inside me. The second chance was still there. But it was no longer gentle. It was demanding an answer. I wish I could say the decision came with certainty. That there was a clear moment when fear stepped aside and courage took its place. That's not how it happened. What came instead was exhaustion, the deep, bone-level exhaustion of living half a life while pretending it was enough. I realized I was more afraid of repeating the past than of losing the future. And in that imbalance, I had already chosen stagnation. The second chance didn't come with instructions. It didn't promise redemption or happiness. It only offered one thing, the opportunity to choose again. Not wisely. Not safely. Just honestly. That honesty terrified me. Because when I stripped away fear, guilt, and caution, what remained was desire. Not ambition. Not success. Desire. A wanting that had nothing to do with approval or security. A quiet but stubborn pull toward a life I couldn't fully describe, only feel. And feeling had hurt me before. I spent days arguing with myself. If I step forward and fail, I'll prove that I learned nothing. If I stay where I am, I'll survive but I'll disappear. Those were the two futures available to me. Neither was painless. But only one involved being awake. I began to understand something fundamental: second chances don't save you. They expose you. They remove the excuse of ignorance. You can no longer say you didn't know better. You did. I did. That knowledge left me with no safe place to hide. The final push wasn't dramatic. It never is. It came in the form of a question I could no longer avoid: if this is the version of life I'm protecting so carefully, why does it feel so fragile? Why does it require me to silence myself to maintain it? I thought about the future again, not 10 years ahead, not 5. Just 1 year. 1 year lived exactly as I was living now. The thought made my chest tighten. Not because something bad would happen, but because nothing meaningful would. That was my answer. I didn't burn my life down. I didn't make a reckless leap. I did something quieter and far more frightening: I chose engagement over protection. I started saying yes where I would have hidden. I spoke when silence felt safer. I allowed myself to want things without immediately punishing myself for it. Some choices went badly. Some consequences hurt. Fear didn't disappear, it screamed louder at first. But something else appeared alongside it: energy. Presence. A sense of participation I hadn't felt in years. I failed again. Not in the same way. Not catastrophically. But enough to remind me that failure isn't the enemy. Avoidance is. The second chance wasn't meant to spare me from pain. It was meant to teach me how to live with it without disappearing. I stopped treating my life like evidence in a trial where I had to prove I deserved to exist. I stopped living defensively. Slowly. Imperfectly. With setbacks. But consciously. People noticed the change before I did. They said I seemed different. Less careful. Less distant. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. This wasn't a transformation meant to be understood from the outside. What surprised me most was that regret didn't vanish. It softened. It changed shape. It became information instead of a sentence. I could look at my past without wanting to erase myself from it. The second chance didn't give me a new life. It gave me ownership of this one. I no longer measure my days by how little damage I do. I measure them by how present I am inside them. Some days are messy. Some are quiet. Some feel pointless. But they are mine. Fully. Deliberately. If you're listening to this because you feel suspended between who you were and who you're afraid to become, hear this clearly: the second chance is not about doing everything right. It's about refusing to live anesthetized by fear. You don't honor a second chance by being careful. You honor it by being alive. I almost ruined mine by trying to protect it. Instead, I chose to risk it. And that choice, imperfect, ongoing, unfinished, is the only reason I can finally say this without lying: I didn't waste my second chance. I stopped hiding from it.